Oh, yes.
Welcome back, everyone. Today we're doing a recap and retrospective on the recently reviewed third wave of Masters of the Universe Origins. Now, unlike its predecessor, Wave 2, this is an absolutely massive wave for this line. You have your standard 4 core class figures, as well as 4 deluxe figures. On top of that, you get a new large mount in the form of Panthor, and then, of course, our massive Castle Grayskull playset. So that makes this wave over twice as large as the one that came before it. And honestly, I believe it's the biggest wave that we've had so far, considering that currently we're all the way on Wave 6, with 7 coming down the pike, and none of them have been quite as large as this one. Of course, that's owed in large part to the playset here. But still, this one had a lot to cover, and, took quite a few reviews to get through. So, like with all of my wave retrospectives, we're just going to go and kind of briefly touch on each one, going by size class, or groupings, assortments, whatever you want to call it. Just give that quick overview, and then give my thoughts on the wave as a whole. So starting out, you have your 4 core assortment figures, which are your Mer-Man, Zodac, She-Ra, and Roboto. And it's quite the interesting wave. 2 of these guys are your pretty standard fare, with Zodac and Mer-Man mostly reusing parts from previous wave toys. But then when you get to She-Ra and Roboto, both of these have almost entirely new tooling between them, which is something you do not see often in a Masters of the Universe line. So it did make for a very interesting third wave of your core figures, right? You get your typical, A-lister type character. You get Zodac, who's a bit more obscure, even though he was one of the first toys released in the vintage line. But then you get Roboto, who's a very unique figure with a unique gimmick where he has, the gears in his chest that turn when he turns his waist, makes his mouth flap around, gets the interchangeable weapons on the arm. So he kind of does everything Trapjaw does, but a little bit more. But then you get She-Ra, who's very interesting because she never had a toy in the original Masters of the Universe line. She-Ra, her figures didn't debut until she got her own toy line. So that makes for some nice variation within the core assortment for this wave. Then we move on to our deluxe figures, where you had Ram-Man, Clamp Champ, Battle Armor He-Man, and Battle Armor Skeletor. Now, He-Man and Skeletor are, of course, returning characters that appear in every wave in some form or another. But this time, they are our introduction to the deluxe price point, which consists of your normal core assortment type figures with extra accessories, usually in the form of an alternate head, some alternate hands, some extra weapons or something to use. And they made a pretty strong case for it. It's the first time you've been able to customize your Origins figures. Not to mention their whole battle armor gimmick is really cool, where you just tap their chest and it cycles between different levels of battle damage. That's a really, really neat touch. Then we get Clamp Champ and Ram-Man. Now Clamp Champ, he's more your standard figure, right? He's mostly a He-Man recolor with a new head. But he gets his cool little spring-loaded clamp thing, gets his extra little pincher weapon there. And then Ram-Man, who is one of the most unique figures to be released in this line because he is all new parts, works completely differently than the other toys, gets his little spring-loaded, jumping gimmick, and overall is just very cool. So we do get to see the deluxe assortment come out strong here. You get 4 very solid figures to use for it. None of these guys necessarily had to have the deluxe treatment. They could have just been released in their, standard versions that came out in the vintage line and not have any extra parts, but where's the fun in that? Then up next we get Panthor, who's the second mount to be released in the Origins line, and he's just a straight recolor of Battle Cat without the helmet. Nothing too exciting there, and he is, unlike the vintage toy, just covered in a hard plastic rather than having that flock texture. Now there is a flock Panthor, though he doesn't come out till a later wave. I think it's wave 5, if I remember right. And he's a Walmart exclusive here in the US and retails for quite a bit more. So if you just want a Panthor toy, you don't care about the flocking, you want to pay about as much as you did for Battle Cat, then this is a good option. Otherwise, you could have held out till wave 5. Of course, they're both out by now. But if you do want to have the more authentic Panthor toy, you can always just go searching around Walmarts and, pay a little extra on the back end to get something that feels like the original toy. So either way, it's up to you. I was perfectly satisfied with this Panthor toy, though I will say that I have since obtained the flocked one, so I will be reviewing that later, and we'll see which one's truly better. But yeah, more mounts is always exciting. Now, personally, I wish we had more. Right now, we just have Battle Cat and then 2 versions of Panthor. There is Stridor coming out later, but there are still a few I'd like to see. Of course, we get Stridor's evil recolor. The one I want to see is Mantisaur, which is Hordak's mount. That thing's really cool. And I also wouldn't mind, even though it wasn't in the original line, I'd love for them to do the horse or unicorn-like mount that Teela's seen riding in old artwork. That'd be very cool. And heck, I'd even take She-Ra's mount, honestly. It doesn't really fit in, you know, the aesthetic of most of the line, but our heroes need something to ride into battle, so I would take it. Alright, then lastly, we move on to Castle Grayskull, the centerpiece of not really just this wave, but the entire Origins toy line so far. It is our first, and so far, only playset to be released. I'm really hoping for more. This one seems to be doing very well, so I'd love to see a Snake Mountain down the road, maybe some of the smaller playsets. Maybe, if Mattel smiles down upon us, we may actually get the Eternia playset one day. It hasn't been done since a vintage line, so I'm not going to get my hopes up too much, but you never know. You never know. I wonder how much that thing would run for these days. So yeah, the Castle Grayskull set, it's very, very cool. As we know, it opens up, you get all the stuff on the inside, and it's been made to be modular, so it can be combined with other figures that were released later, either in later waves or Paracon exclusives. So that thing is a great, great buy. And for 70 to 80 bucks, it more than justifies the price tag. So yeah, that's our overview of each one of these releases here. So now my thoughts on the wave as a whole. Like I said, it's a very large wave of figures. Now some people might argue that Clamp Champ and Ram-Man are part of wave 4 because they didn't really come out at the exact same time as the Battle Armor figures. That's up to you if you want to consider it wave 4. For the sake of reviews, I'm considering them wave 3, just because they include the same mini-comic as the first 2 deluxe figures. But either way, whether you get 2 or 4 deluxe toys, it's still a really prominent addition to this wave. And then, of course, your core figures are no slouches either. Now, personally, I didn't find Mer-Man or Zodac to be the most interesting. Like, they're iconic characters, so they're kind of must-haves, but they don't have a lot going on. They get just chest armor and 1 weapon, that's all they get. So they are some of the more plain figures. Roboto, I think, is just awesome. He's got a lot of play value to him. And I'm really happy they kept his little gear-operated gimmick there. And then She-Ra, she's just interesting because she is so very different. She gets mostly new tooling, aside from the forearms and hands. And she comes with quite a bit of accessories. She gets a sword, a shield, she gets her crown, which can be flipped for a mask. And then she gets, you know, a lot of cloth goods and all that. So yeah, even just the core assortment here is very cool and very interesting. Maybe not as out there and unique as the second wave, because the second wave had a very strong showing for unique figures and, you know, neat characters. They had Orko and all that. But it's almost there as far as uniqueness. Then Panthor, he's just a must for any MOTU collection. You got to give Skeletor's mount. And then this thing right here, this beautiful playset. I adore that. So this wave just has so much to offer. It has quality and quantity. And I think it's the wave that I've enjoyed reviewing the most so far. Now, it does kind of set some high expectations for the line, and none of the following waves have really matched up to the hype of this one. There's just a lot going on here. Doesn't mean they won't in the future, but they do seem to have kind of pulled back after this big wave. Not by a lot. A lot of the later waves are, you know, fairly packed with stuff, but this one I think really sets a high bar, and I do hope to see more fleshed out waves like this in the future. I hope to see by, you know, sometime next year, another playset, a big one to go with this. Really want Snake Mountain. Can't have Grayskull without Snake Mountain. They just kind of go hand in hand. It's like having Battle Cat without Panthor. Like, you need both. So yeah, as far as I'm concerned, easily one of the best, if not the best waves in the entire toy line up to this point. And if you are a MOTU collector, I think this is a very important wave to touch on and get some very important prominent characters and to get some very cool figures and, again, our first ever playset in Origins. So, there you have it. This is my take on the third wave of MOTU Origins. Now, I want to know what you all think of this wave. Do you agree that this is a really stellar wave, or are you a little more, you know, lukewarm to it, or maybe you don't like it at all? I'd love to get everybody's feedback in the comments section. If you enjoyed this retrospective, make sure to toss it a like. Let YouTube know you want to see more stuff like this. If you do want to see more like this, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you always get a heads up when I post something new. I thank you for joining me for this look at the entire third wave of Masters of the Universe Origins. And with all that said, I will see you next time.